Every day I tried to convince him to get out, but he always yelled at me to go away. Finally, about a month later, I gave up. Another month went by and Ryan still hadn't left his room. None of us tried to get him out since we knew he would just end up yelling at us. During the night, my mind would often wander and think about Ryan. As time went on, my thoughts became more and more paranoid, and I began to get worried. It was around the 2-month mark when I decided enough was enough. I woke up early that morning and couldn't fall back asleep. My parents were working, and it was just me and Ryan at home. I silently crept down the stairs and walked towards the door to Ryan's room. I knocked gently. Silence. I knocked harder but still got no response. I tried calling his name but was still met with silence. I continued to knock, eventually banging at the door. I was getting really scared. I put my ear to the door and noticed something. I heard a noise that sounded like a muffled buzzing. I finally got to a point where I decided I had to force my way in somehow. I went in the garage, retrieved a baseball bat, and headed back to Ryan's door. I struck the door. As the wood broke, I was hit with a horrific stench and a swarm of flies flying out. Suppressing a gag, I turned on my phone's flashlight and headed downstairs. I called my brother's name. "Ryan?" Again, I was met with silence. At this point, the buzzing was deafening. Finally, once I reached the bottom of the stairs, I shined a light. What I saw will haunt my mind forever. Sitting on a computer chair was my brother. He was completely infested. His eyes were red and bloodshot, with parasites swimming about. He was unclothed, covered in deep, bleeding, open wounds filled with squirming maggots. Worms and larvae crawled throughout his body and underneath his skin. Flies swarmed the room and landed all over his body. His light brown hair had grown long and messy, covered with insects. On a desk near his bed were the containers I'd seen. They had contained the insects he had brought down here. He had been living off of the food, ensuring that he survived. I approached my brother. He lay unmoving, his bloodshot eyes glazed over. His chest, however, was still rising and falling. Suddenly, he spoke. "Alex?" I stuttered a reply. Yes, Ryan." He spoke quietly and eerily calm, his voice a rasped whisper. "Do you think Mom and Dad will finally care about me again?" It was at the moment where everything finally made sense. Ryan had felt abandoned since my diagnosis with leukemia. It only worsened as my parents both started working longer hours. And now here he sat, infested and dying, having just a sliver of hope that his parents would finally have a reason to give him attention. Tears were falling down my face now. Of course they will." Barely 20 minutes later, the ambulances arrived. My parents rushed home from work and couldn't stop sobbing once they saw Ryan in his current state. He was rushed to the hospital and died hours later. He had gotten exactly what he hoped for. Mom and Dad are distraught and cannot stop thinking about him. At first, I felt guilty. If it wasn't for my leukemia, he never would have felt neglected. But then, I felt anger. He didn't have to destroy his own body. All he wanted was his parents' attention, and now he isn't even alive to see it. Now, as I stand in front of my brother's grave, I feel nothing but pure emptiness. A hole in my heart that Ryan once filled is now empty. I sighed, looking at my brother's grave. As I stared at his engraved name, I noticed it. A little maggot was crawling down his gravestone.